Welcome back into the mental game, where this week's guest is actor Terry Crews.
I would say suicide entered right when everything fell apart. That was the first time I actually seriously thought I would be better off dead.
And in this episode, Terry opens up about his amazing career in Hollywood, where you've seen him in TV and movies like Brooklyn Nine-Nine, America's Got Talent, White Chicks, and much, much more. But Terry tells his powerful, emotional mental health story in an hour interview that I know you're going to love. This conversation got deep and emotional. Terry opens up about his childhood, his abusive father, finding pornography as a kid and that turning into an addiction, which led to him cheating on his wife and having suicidal thoughts, having to check into rehab. We go over a lot in Terry's mental health story, and it is a really powerful and emotional conversation that I can't wait to share with all of you. But if anyone out there is struggling with their mental health, or you see somebody you love, a family member or friend, going through a tough moment, just asking them how they are feeling can make a big, big difference or even save their life. For tools on how to help somebody going through crisis, please visit the Ohio Suicide Prevention Foundation website at ohiospf.org, and we can help everyone possible with their mental health. But now it is time for the latest episode here on The Mental Game with Terry Crews. Welcome back into the mental game. As you can see, I have a very special guest standing next to me, or sitting next to me, I should say. Big smile, you know him, Terry Crews from White Chicks, America's Got Talent, and just being probably one of the most infectious personalities in Hollywood. Terry, thank you so much for coming on the mental game.
Thank you, Brandon. Good to be here, man.
Yeah, this is something that I know you care a lot about, mental health. We're going to get into your background, your career, your early life, everything that you've done in movies, TV, and your personal battle with depression, anxiety, and mental health. But the first thing I ask everyone on the mental game is, what does mental health mean to them? And everyone has a different answer because it's very unique to that person, whether it's something that they've always taken care of, or maybe there's a traumatic event that made them take better care of their own mental health. I'll ask you the same thing, though. What does it mean to you?
Wow. I think for me, mental health means actually being in touch with yourself. As men, we have the ability, almost it's an advantage sometimes, but we have the ability to compartmentalize, which is something where it keeps you going, it keeps you moving, doing what you're doing. You can fight a war, you can do a job, you can do all these things, and things will get done, but you actually are a mess later. Like there's all of a sudden you have to, it's coming back in a big way. And when I say being in touch with yourself, it's kind of like, it's a lot of, to me, unhealthy mental health is when you never get in touch. And then you never know what's wrong. You don't know what makes you tick. You don't know why. You don't know where. You don't know how. And this thing is coming. Like the confusion. It's almost like you gotta settle out. You know what I mean? It's almost like all the chips have been played and everything, but when it's time to settle, it's like, oh no, you know what I mean? People are finding out they're either in the hole or they're bankrupt, or they thought they had it together and they don't. And that was me.
I feel like men specifically bury things, like you said, compartmentalize, and you're taught at a young age, and it's starting to change now with the younger generations, but you're taught to rub dirt on it. Just keep going. Don't be weak. Like, showing emotion is weak as a man. When were you comfortable speaking up about how you were feeling and being more comfortable being emotional?
Oh man, this wasn't, it had to be, I didn't even enter the game of sharing my emotions until 2010.
Wow.
You know what I mean? Now, again, I think I've always been artistic.
Yeah.
Which is another thing, which is I'm left-handed, right brain. So I always saw the world a little bit differently. You know what I mean? And I was able to express myself artistically with painting and drawing, even music. You know, I practiced flute and different things. So I was able to even take a different route, which I always had people looking at me funny, but I really wasn't. A lot of people have mistaked artistic ability with emotional ability. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's kind of like, there's a lot of guys that can sing a song and make everybody cry, and then their life is still a shambles.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's kind of like we know how to tap into these things.
Right.
But again, it's back to the fact that, do you know why you're doing this? So do you understand what's happening? 2010 was the first time I actually entered therapy. For the first time, and I had to, because that's when I was realizing, like, oh my God, like my life has fallen apart. Everything that I knew, everything I thought is now in a heap on the ground. Everything I thought I knew was wrong.
Right.
You know what I mean? It was a matter of, you think there's one day you think that, the sun revolves around the earth, and and that's the way it's been. Everything proves it. Everything you could see it goes around us, and then someone gives you the news flash. No, man, we go around the sun.
Yep.
And you're like, what? That I'm trying to tell you, that was what happened to me. I was like, you're kidding. No.
Yep.
No, because you understand, that changes everything.
Yep.
That changes everything, like every iota of everything. When you find out, wow, wait a minute, we go around, and all of a sudden you realize all your math has been wrong.
Yep.
All the presumptions, all the things you
all the
thought,
formulas, the stories that you tell yourself.
Everything was wrong. But now, once you get it right, and if you keep it right, you can go to outer space.
Right.
Because you know. But you could never. It's like planning to go out of space, thinking that we go, that the sun goes around us, and you're never gonna make it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, you're gonna die. In fact, you're gonna die trying. And that's what most men end up doing, because they deal with the knowledge that they had, and it's wrong, and they die.
I give you all the credit in the world it's a hard point to get to rock bottom. I've been there myself. But when you look at yourself in the mirror, and you can have all the help in the world and finally reach out to therapy, have great family and great friends, but it takes the person that you're looking at in the mirror to make that change. And your honesty about that journey since 2010 to now and before, I'd like to unpack that if you're willing to, because your story has a lot of chapters, and they're very powerful, and they've built you into the man that you are today. And I think your story as a child growing up in Flint and watching the relationship between your parents and the anger you had towards your father is something that people deal with, all the time across the country. What was your childhood like? And you spoke about being a joyful kid and having the art element. You weren't allowed to go to the movies, and you had to imagine like all these fun things that people were talking about at school. But what was your childhood like?
Oh my God. First of all, I had a father who was an alcoholic, and a mother who was not, but she was addicted to religion. So it was two addicts in the house.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? One addicted to alcohol, the other one was religion, and I was in the middle. And, you got to understand, me growing up when I was young, early 70s, I mean, there really was no thing such a, it wasn't called alcoholism. Like, you either, unless you were on the street and homeless, that's where you were, that's a wino.
Yeah.
But if you had a job and you were doing your thing, you weren't an alcoholic.
Yeah.
It was so early in those days.
It's part of society, like just
It was just and everybody, you coped with what you did. Everybody had a drink. It was no big deal. That was kind of the thing. Every sitcom, everybody had a drink right after they got home from work. And then my mother was super religious, meaning we went to a church called the Church of God in Christ, and you could not do anything. I mean, I could not go to the movies, couldn't listen to secular music, no dancing, no sports, everything I ended up doing with my life, I could not do as a kid. So I kind of went into myself, you know. It was
Yeah.
one of those things. I had a lot of questions, which got me in a lot of trouble. But I started this art ability simply because I had a huge imagination and was wondering what the world was like. I mean, people would tell me, you know, they went to the movies and they would describe the films, and I would try to draw them out.
Wow.
Because I couldn't see them,
Yeah.
you know. And all these things, man, I'd go, but this is another thing, is the world was always creeping in.
Yeah.
You know, I'd go over people's homes and they're listening to the latest music and they're listening and they're doing, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm seeing freedom. I'm watching like, whoa, these guys are dancing. These people are going to movies. These people are not alcohol. Like, I was like, you know, I'll never forget seeing my friend's dad come home and I ran. Like, I was like, oh, hey man, your father's coming home. And they were like, yeah. No problem. I was like, he's coming in. Like, I literally was telling my buddy, man, he's coming in the house.
Yeah.
And he was like, yeah, it's my father, it's my dad. I was going, and I was scared because I knew when your daddy came home, get out, go, run, just be anywhere he isn't. It was shocked to me that this man, that these kids, other kids were like, oh man, they actually want their father to come home. And then it created this huge like gap in my life. Like I was like, something's wrong. What am I missing? Okay, and then I threw it all into being a good kid because my thing was, especially when you become a pleaser, because my father's alcoholic. It was like I just would do anything to make him happy, to make him calm, so he wouldn't blow up. So it was like, you need another drink? What do you want me to do? And then I'll fix things. I'll do stuff. I'll be a good kid. I'll sit down. I'll shut up.
Yeah.
And when my mother was on the religious side, it was the same thing, where it was like, how could I'll lead the solo and the choir. I'll jump around. I'll go to church with you. I'll pray with you. I'll do all this stuff. And so, but I didn't know what I wanted.
Yeah.
It was always about what the parents were about. So I kind of lost myself in them. And it was horrible. And the thing for me, and I'm not being too long, is that I jumped into pornography as a kid because I had an uncle. Again, it was one of those experiences when you leave the house. And I was a young kid, and I probably was 8 or 9 years old, and he had a trunk of pornography in his basement. Yeah. And I was hooked immediately, like, because that was something where it was like a drink. Yeah. It was like a drug or anything else. I immediately forgot about any problems, and I could escape there. And I didn't even know what sex was. That's what's so crazy. No one ever talked about it. I didn't even know what it was, but I knew this is powerful. This is incredible, man. Like, what? This is what I always wondered. Is this the secret? This is what's going on. And I got hooked, man. And that was my secret for years and years because I knew I couldn't talk to my father. To this day, I've never had a talk about sex with my father. To this day. And my mother was always like, you know, don't mention sex. Are you doing it? Are you doing it? And it's like, no. Yeah. So everything was condemnation. So I just decided I'll keep this to myself. Yeah. And it created a horrible, horrible cycle of guilt, of shame, and then a cycle of having to do more to get rid of the shame. I had to be a better kid. Which was a cycle, you know what I mean? And it starts over
You're
and
spiraling
over again,
yourself
you know,
over and over again.
And you get a lot of shit done.
Yeah.
I'm trying to tell you, you become like a major achiever. You know what I mean? I was always the one. Like, Terry does this and Terry does that, and look how talented, and look at it. And I didn't mind that because it covered up what I felt inside. I felt like a dirty dog. Like, I felt like nothing. I felt horrible. I knew what was going on in my house. I knew what was going on in myself. But I knew also I felt like everyone else was like that because in the church that was that restrictive, man, my pastor was selling drugs out of the pulpit. Wow. This is what's so crazy because these kind of things, when you're that maniacal about rules, and it's like you can't follow them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, and so you learn to hide. You learn, and so even in the church, this is where a lot of problems, become where people go to church and they feel like we're covering up what's really the issue.
Right. Yep.
And dude, it was, I mean, we had so many people in that church with double lives. Some people were gay and wouldn't say. Some people were selling drugs. Some people were having affairs. Some people were doing, and no one was open about anything. Like no one would talk.
Yep.
It was just, hey man, how are you doing? God's good.
Yeah.
And you covered it up with some sort of saying, and you were a mess inside.
Well, you having that experience at home with your parents and your dad being an alcoholic, your mom being very, very religious, and you having this creative juice in you that you just want to get out and experience life, and you start to, dabble in certain things, friends' houses, seeing how their parents treat them. You mentioned discovering pornography, and that became an addiction for you. I want to dive into that. But first, the watching your father and your mother's relationship, how did that scar you and hurt your mental health at a young age when you're learning and picking things up?
Oh, easy. Well, my earliest memory is my father knocking my mother out. He was physically abusive, just straight up. And it's wild because he didn't hit us because my mother would kill him.
Right.
But my mother let him hit her. Not let, I wouldn't even say let, but she would just say, she kind of took her abuse as par for the course.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And you got to understand too, when you have people at the church who are like, you can never divorce, and so it became her issue.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It was like there's something you're doing wrong if he's hitting you. And dude, that changed my whole framework was like, okay, it's a man's world. And I was so scared of him, man. It was like, it's your rules, dude. And I learned that women were second-class citizens, straight up. And it taught me everything I needed to know. I mean, it was just like women were just not as valuable as men were.
Yeah.
Straight up. And everything in my life told me that. And it was even from the way people acted on the street. And I remember, having friends that were like, dude, you're supposed to have 5 girlfriends. I was like, what?
Right.
Huh? How do you do that? They were like, hey, you're a player. You got to be a player. And I was like, so that means like 5 of them is worth 1 of us. You know what I mean? And that's how I equated it in my head.
Right.
It's just, and it's all these wrong lessons, right? And dude, I was confused, but I said, I got to win this game called life. So I had to fake it. Like I had to literally be this picture of manhood, this super manhood.
Yeah.
Because what it is it's like, it's a form of narcissism that there's being human, and then there's being superhuman, and what you try to get to, you got to be superhuman all the time, but you can't keep that.
Right.
So what happens is you fall below human, because when you fail, now you're less than human.
Yeah.
And the problem is the thing is, in reality is that you're always human all the time. But if the only way you exist is either above it or beneath it, you're always on the wrong track.
Yeah, it's a roller coaster.
You know what I mean? You're seeing it when you're below it. You're worse than everybody else.
Yeah.
So now I can actually put suicide in my head, because now I'm less than human, and I deserve to die. I don't deserve to be here. I don't deserve the good things I have. Or if you're superhuman, now you're above everybody else. I get to determine who, what, where, and I am the boss. I'm the one that tells, what's happening in your life and his life and their life. And it's kind of like the 80s were all about that, where if you had money, you were the king of everything. You could get people to do anything. Yeah. And, it's kind of like the rules were, if you had to, it's like a rules of a business is, became if you had the biggest bench press, even though it had nothing to do with the business.
Right.
You know what I mean?
You're
like,
the big badass man.
hey,
Like
man, he benches mess. Okay, he's the boss. Tell us where these, where the how we should sell these things, or what.
Yeah.
Let's look at the receipts in the business.
Yep.
He's like, he don't know, but
Yeah.
I got the biggest bench.
Yeah.
And those guys ran everything, by the way.
Yeah.
And they would run you into the ground. And I realized that's the way I needed to be. And football was the way I jumped in that world because I was an artist, but I felt like no one was going to pay me to do art. But everybody's going to give me a job, or I was kind of going to get money to go scholarship or whatever to play football.
Yeah.
Because as an athlete, it looked at you were macho, you were superhuman.
Macho man.
You were immediately superhuman. So you got everything you wanted. If you were the biggest athlete, you got what you wanted.
Yep.
And that's where I live. I mean, that was my goal even as a young kid. I remember working out first because I thought I would have to kill my father. And then as I started to get muscle and get stronger, and the term I like to use, when I got a little neck, the gang stopped messing with me. I used to get beat up.
Yeah.
Gangs stopped messing with me. The drug dealers decided, well, maybe because they would never mess with a guy they thought could go pro or do something athletically. It was kind of like, all right, we'll leave him alone. And I found protection in that and just having that. But I got all the other junk that came with it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. You mentioned suicide. You've battled a lot throughout your own mental health journey. And when you go back, no one talked about it. You're supposed to be this macho man and not bring up your problems. You're going through, the abuse that your father was doing to your mother, the abuse that you were receiving yourself from your father, trying to figure out what this addiction that you didn't know was an addiction at first.
Yep.
With pornography. You have so much to balance, but you feel like you can't speak up to anyone, I'm sure. And the stigma with mental health, you didn't say a word. Did suicide ever come into your mind, and when did that happen?
I would say suicide entered right when everything fell apart. That was the first time I actually seriously thought I would be better off dead. And I remember when my wife decided to leave, and there I was. And this was the thing, man, Brandon, I was very successful at the time. Had done some bunch of movies and was doing TV and had money and was living the picture. But then my personal life, it was a shambles, man.
Mm-hmm.
There were things I never told my wife, never told anybody. And I was just afraid that this thing was going to fall apart. Like, it's like having something up on stilts, and you keep building it really, really big, but you're looking at these stilts and they're just bending.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's where I was. I was like, oh man, I knew my marriage was going to fall at some time, and I knew this precarious little picture was going to fall over. Mm-hmm. But Hollywood didn't care about that.
Right.
Like, if it did, it happens many, many times. So they were like, hey man, they don't care if you lose your wife and kids. They don't have. There's not a problem. In fact, we'll give you more movies if you
right.
do. And I hated the way I was thinking like that. Like, I was thinking, well, that's not dangerous in Hollywood. I mean, people, But then I was thinking about, what about me as a person? Like, this goes against everything I said. I've told people I am. I have this story. But it's a whole nother story. It's 2 lives.
Yeah. And
I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. And I literally was just, I was in the throes. And when that moment happened, I actually reached out because it was a good friend of mine. And I said, hey man, I just lost my wife and kids. And I said, dude, I'm a fake. I'll never forget. I was like, dude, I'm fake. Everything everyone sees is just not real. And he said, Terry, I can't promise you that you're going to get your wife and family back. He said, in fact, they might be gone. He said, But I can tell you that you need to get better for you.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you have to understand that was a foreign concept. The fact that I had to improve for improvement's sake.
Yeah.
You know, for my whole life, remember, I was a pleaser.
Yep.
So it was, you do good things so that so-and-so wouldn't get mad, or this and this. And then I learned how to do good things so I could get what I would call Scooby snacks. So it's like, there's a reward here. This is a reward here. This is where you get money. You do good, but you don't mean it.
Yeah.
You know, it's literally like, okay, you know, paint the picture so that you can get what you want. Mm-hmm. So it's very manipulative.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I learned how to manipulate people.
Right.
But I didn't learn how to do good for goodness sake. Like, there was no internal locus of control there.
Yeah.
It was always about manipulating people so you could get what you wanted. And I was like, just for me? Like, I've never done that. I don't understand what that means. And then that's when I knew. I said, I don't know where to go, but I've never been to therapy. And I decided to check myself in to this place. It was called Psychological Counseling Services in Phoenix. And I'd heard about it. It was dealing with sex addiction. Mm-hmm. But also it was my first experience with just talking my story out. Like, I'd never been to therapy. And this place has dealt with big, major people that have gotten major scandals. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? From pastors to athletes to all these people who were like, had double lives.
Yeah.
And I remember going in there and I was like, oh man, first day I was like, this ain't me, man. This is crazy. This is not me.
Yep.
I said, I gooped up, man. I said, this is all me. And they just kept reading my mail. And it was like, so was your father alcoholic? I was like, yeah. And they said, was your mom very religious? I was like, yeah.
How'd you know that? Yeah.
And they were like, okay. And they just kept giving me these signs. And I was like, yes. I said, oh, this is me. This is me. And dude, talk about, and what happened, I like to call it the cracking of an egg, because you're trying to piece it back together, but there's no way you can do that. It's like the egg is all over. It's like, it's gone. Now you're frying it by now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? The hardest thing, man, I just remember, like, going back to my room, because it was an intensive where you stay all day. It was like 12 hours, and you go back home. You go back to your hotel room. And I was like, how did I get this so wrong? Now, this is the thing, too. Because you looked at yourself like a superhuman,
Yeah.
then you're dealing with the embarrassment of having it that wrong. And you're dealing with that because now, it's very narcissistic because you think you're perfect.
Right. That you can do anything and get through anything.
Yeah.
And there's no
like,
problems.
I had this all right. And you realize, and no, you had it all wrong, dude.
Yeah.
And then I started, and it was like, what else did I have wrong? What else did I have wrong? And it's like, the best way I can really describe it is, let's say you have a really filthy house. I mean, filthy, like you're a hoarder.
Yeah.
And you got a guest bathroom that gets clean. Just a guest bathroom. And it's spotless. All of a sudden, you're like, this house, holy cow.
Yeah.
You know, you were fine living in your mess.
Yep.
It was like, oh yeah, you get used to your junk. You could step over it. You knew where the junk was.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I knew where the pile of dirt was, and I was like, that's my pile right here, you know. But once that one spot is cleaned up, you realize the whole house needs to be done. In fact, for me, I realized the house needed to fall.
Yeah.
Like, it was beyond repair. It was mold in the walls. I said, I got to tear this whole house down.
Yeah.
And that was the beginning of my new life. Like, it was totally a new start for me.
For you, if I can dig into that phone call when you call your wife and let her know what you had not told her.
Yeah.
That is a moment that I think probably was the lowest point for you.
Absolutely.
And it also is the most life-changing and start to taking care of your mental health. What led to that phone call, and what do you remember about the emotions, the suicidal thought that came up, and what you felt in that call?
Oh yeah. Well, first of all, it was wild as, as an actor, I was in Vancouver like 10 years earlier than that phone call. So I just started in 2000, and I was nervous and scared, and the way I always dealt with that was porn. And what was crazy is that, I spent my time in Vancouver, and then porn wasn't enough. Because that's the thing. You get that, you put that in your life, all of a sudden, you begin to act things out.
Right.
And I told myself I was getting a massage, the whole thing. And I ended up with a masseuse, and cheated on my wife for the first time. And I said, okay, I'm going to go to my grave with this. Like, I don't believe I crossed this line, but I will never tell. Like, again, a lot of the things that I'd already done, I said, I'm going to be private. But this one was like, holy cow, I crossed this line. And what was wild is that my wife was always suspicious.
Yeah.
And I'd start arguments to basically get out of it. Like, what do you mean? There's ways I knew to be very manipulative in order to not be questioned anymore. Start arguments, and she's like, fine, whatever, I'm all right, what, and so I held it. It was my secret, and I kept it secret. And then I'll never forget, because what happens though, every time something like that happens, and every time you use pornography, I got one step away from my marriage more and more. It was like putting a brick.
Yeah.
It's like, again, I would really compare it to any other drug. If you're using, every time you do, you're one step away from the people who love you.
Yeah.
Every drink puts you one step away from those who love you. And for me, it was the same thing with porn. And I said, and we were just getting farther and farther apart. Like, I couldn't see us being married to this spot. Like, it was just, when is it going to happen? Not if, it's just when.
Yeah.
And dude, we were arguing on the phone, and I'll never forget, there was a moment when I was just tired. I was just like, I knew who I was, because I knew, you're lying.
You live with it.
See, the question is the question I used to always ask, which was crazy, is that I would go, why doesn't she believe me? And I always put it on her. Like, why don't you believe me? But everything changed when the question became, why am I lying? That's a whole different perspective. Now it's me,
Yeah.
And I was looking at her like, it was you should be. It was great because you could always blame and push, and there was that moment on the call when I was like, am I thinking up another lie? And I said, I can't. I'm done thinking up lies. Like, there was not another lie to think up.
Yeah.
She kept questioning me, and she was like, something. She said, and I'll never forget. She said, what is it I don't know about you, Terry Crews? Whew. Like, she went right there. It was the perfect question, because it was either I'm going to lie about this or I'm going to tell the truth. And I told her about what happened in Vancouver. This is what you don't know about me. And I thought, and it was so weird, as I thought, see, we cool now. Oh. You got to understand, like, that's how deluded you could be. Because I'm like, that was a long time ago. She was like, but for her, it happened 30 seconds ago. And she was like, I'm out. I'm done. I was like, what are you talking about? Because I feel like, but another thing, I could manipulate you by the money, the life. But my wife didn't care about that. She's like, she never cared about any of that stuff. Yeah. That was all me. That was all my little man world. You know what I mean? She was like, I'm never been with you. I married you and you were broke. You had nothing. Loved you. And if we continue to have nothing, I still would have loved you. Right. Like, somewhere you thought that was a game changer. It's not. But this is.
Yeah.
You're not being honest. You're not being loyal. You're lying to me all these years. And I knew I lost it. I knew it was over. It was crushing. Dude, when I say crushing, it was a darkness that I can't describe. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It was like the world closed in, and I fell in a hole. And the only way I could have got out was if somebody reached down. And that was my call for help.
Yeah. And I it's an emotional journey when you get to the rock bottom moment. And you can either crash and burn. And for me, we were talking before we started rolling, I was suicidal for months, and it got to a point where I've used alcohol for a long, long time to cope. I don't know if I was an alcoholic, but now I look back and I was addicted to that buzz. Today, when we're recording this, actually marks 8 months sober, which is like,
all right. Congrats,
yeah,
brother.
Thanks, brother. It's just crazy to me that you talk about your porn addiction, that you just go to this and it's your coping mechanism, and then you have that crash and burn moment. Yeah. And it's either you can do two things: you can crash and burn, or you can take a step, no matter how uncomfortable it is. You checked in. I've done the same thing. Those first 2 days, I had no want to be there. I didn't open up. I didn't say anything. Yeah. And I'll never forget when one of the therapists in these classrooms, I don't know how yours was, but we talked to therapists, psychiatrists, then you had these group classes where same thing.
Yeah, we had them.
Yeah, and you have people of every age, every background, every color, but we all have one thing in common. We have an addiction, or we don't want to be here. We're depressed and suicidal. And someone asked me, "Why aren't you opening up, Brandon?" And I said, I've always been emotional. I just don't want to be a bitch. And excuse my language, but I said that, and the therapist stopped me and she said, "That's the problem right there. That's the stigma with mental health, especially men's mental health." Yep. I had no idea. I thought that's just who I am. Yep. And once I realized that, and that I could open up more, and I've had this same conversation with Ricky Williams. He had the same revelation of, he was kind of a bitch and was overly emotional. Yeah. Guess what? There's nothing wrong with that. And as soon as you look at yourself in the mirror and start making that change, and you did it when you checked in and you had to work on yourself, your marriage, your career, but when you take control of it, it's a grind and it's a struggle, but you have to do that if you want to be truly happy with yourself.
What's funny is that once you overcome that, it's funny because, people still call me a bitch to this day. When I came, it's funny. When I came forward.
I'm not going to say that because I don't want you to hit me.
No, but it's funny you say that because, when I came forward about, my sexual assault, it's a lot of people are like, Terry Crews is a bitch. Look at his big old muscular. How could he get assaulted? He's a bitch and he's this and this. And they still say that, like, to this day. But, dude, I feel so relieved. Like that was one of the best things I ever did. Mm-hmm. But it was because of the 10 years of counseling.
Yeah.
And therapy that allowed me to open up to realize that, wait a minute, man, I'm just human. Mm-hmm. And this is another thing that blew me away. When I said it and I came forward, there were so many men. I mean, you're talking wrestlers at Ohio State. You're talking football players from the pros to college. They all came forward. I had to say hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of men came forward to say, "Hey, man, I got molested when I was 8. I got molested last year." Mm-hmm. This guy, I was at my job and this guy grabbed me and I was like, what? And this is what's so crazy is because you put it out of your head like it didn't happen.
Yeah.
No, I'm too manly for that to happen. Mm-hmm. But I had to acknowledge, no, that happened to you. That was you. Mm-hmm. And the thing is that people were like, well, Terry, let this thing happen. And I'm just like, no. Just like my mother didn't let herself get abused. It's just, these things are like straight bullets.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, if someone's firing, just shooting an AK-47, and you get hit in the shoulder, did you let yourself get hit?
No.
No. Dude, this hit me. I did the talk with Dax Shepard. He was like, look, it's not your fault. It's not your fault, but it is your responsibility. Mm-hmm. That bit hit me so hard. It's not your fault, but it is your responsibility to do something about your situation, about what happened to you, because that's all we can do.
Yep.
Dude, oh my God, dude, but so when I hear people go, yeah, a lot of times it's online because they don't say this stuff to my face.
Right. I'm not saying it to your face sitting next to you. I know that.
But again, I don't mind it.
Yeah.
It's just par for the course because that is the thing that keeps people in a hole.
Yep.
Imagine if we fell in a hole and you have no way out, and if you yell for help, someone's going to call you a bitch.
Crazy.
So what happens is people die in the hole, and they never come out. I mean, you get skeletons. You're down there with skeletons who never said a word because they didn't want to be called a bitch.
Yep.
Or be called less than manly. And dude, I'm like, help. If you go to war, people say help. Mm-hmm. And they get out of the pit, and there's not one thing. This is the only way you're going to survive. But remember, it's about being superhuman. As a man, you have to be more than human.
Yep.
So I realize my humanity involves me yelling for help.
Have you noticed somebody in your life recently just not being themselves? Maybe you notice that they're sad or angry or not hanging out with your family or friends as much as they usually do. They might be struggling with their mental health and going through crisis right now, and you can help them. If you want to learn more about how to be a suicide prevention advocate, you can find resources and tools at the Ohio Suicide Prevention Foundation website, ohiospf.org. Again, ohiospf.org. You've heard Terry and I talk about this with both of our mental health stories in this episode. You can't do it alone. And talking about our mental health can help you or somebody that needs to hear it. I mean, that's how we help each other in these tough moments when we're feeling anxious, when we're going through those tough moments, struggling with depression or even suicidal thoughts. I promise, the more that we talk, the more we can help each other. You've heard Terry and I talk about it throughout this entire episode, and that's exactly what we want to help with at the Ohio Suicide Prevention Foundation, because together we can help each other with our mental health. I tell people two things with mental health, and I'm not a therapist, not a psychologist.
Me neither.
I've lived through depression, anxiety, addiction, had to check in because I was suicidal. Number one, do something. I don't care if it's call your mom, call your best friend, call your therapist. Please just do something. And number two is feelings are temporary.
Yes.
And I never would have believed that when I sat there on the edge of a bridge, drunk, thinking about jumping off, or those nights, thinking about laying down in traffic. I wrote a goodbye letter sober one day and took a bunch of pills and prayed not to wake up. I had this for months and months. I never would have believed that. But look at where you can go. Look at where you're at 10 plus years later from your rock bottom. I'm about a year and a half from where I was in that moment. And those feelings are temporary. It will pass, but you have to put in the work, like you've said this entire time. If I can, I want to flip the script a little bit with our final 10 minutes here with just how you are taking care of your mental health now, where therapy has been a constant thing for you. I know your wife's working on the other side of this wall right now in her business here that you guys got in LA together. How do you take care of your mental health now?
Oh my God. Constantly.
Yeah.
First of all, there's never underestimate the power of reading. There have been so many books, so many like gems that I've gotten over the years. I mean, through audiobooks and listening podcasts like this. But also, I continue. My wife and I continue to go to counseling. We continue to see people. We continue to talk to people. And then there's another thing where you become, you don't really know something until you're good enough to tell it or to talk about it. I began to talk a lot.
Yeah.
And what's weird is even today, even doing this today, is part of my therapy. It's like by looking back and unpacking different moments, different things, I learn a little bit more about myself every time I talk.
Yep.
Because you have to be able to explain it. You know what I mean? And then also to watch other people get help. It's like, you know, to hear those people come forward and go, dude, my father was an alcoholic. I was in this super religious stuff. I was addicted to porn. I want to stop. I remember one of my big things, this was probably around 2012, maybe 2013. I did a thing called Dirty Little Secret where I had Facebook Live. This was back in the day. And I put a post out that basically told about my pornography addiction. And this is early, like, yeah, it was like 2011, like a year into therapy and stuff. And people flipped. You got to understand.
Yeah.
Flipped.
Different time.
No one they were like, what? Good Morning America, Today Show, CBS This Morning, they all wanted me on the next day. People flipped out. All the people that I worked with, Old Spice was literally, they were like, I think we got to let him go. Oh my God, he's admitting to something that's heinous, this crazy. Yeah. And the reason is I say, hey man, if anyone else is going through something like this, I just had to let you know you're not alone. And let's talk about this stuff. Dude, what was so crazy is that I remember the guys, and this is to their benefit, I have to give them props for this, because Procter & Gamble was like, wait a minute, he didn't do anything wrong. He's just saying what he's been through. I said, no, we're not firing him. In fact, he's good with us. And they let me know. You got to understand, it was so powerful, because it was a moment where they were like, we can't have him as a spokesperson because, but it's like, no, he's admitting to something, he's being human.
Yep.
Then all the people started going. And then I remember telling all the morning shows, I was like, it's on Facebook Live, just play that.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't have to go back and now go on these shows and do all this stuff.
Yeah.
But those moments let me know I wasn't alone. And that's the trick. The trick to a lot of these, I think, suicidal thoughts and thoughts of self-harm is a thought that you're all by yourself, that no one's there with you. And it's a lie, and it's a trick. But when you really reach out and realize, wait a minute, there's a whole bunch of people. This is why I always say social media is it's wonderful and dangerous at the same time, because with kids and teenagers, they're trying to discover their way, and all of a sudden you get a lot of negativity, but you got to find the positive.
Right.
And that's the problem, is it's overwhelming, and you gotta, it can mess with your head, you know? But for me, I found the positive, and I found the people who helped me get out of this hole.
Yep. Well, and you saying you're not alone and realizing that is the most powerful thing with mental health. It's exactly why I started this show.
Exactly.
To help people that feel the same as you and I did. And you mentioned social media. That's the whole reason why we're sitting here. You commented on, I had Nate Burleson on.
That's right.
And you commented on that episode. And I'm like, all right, let's figure out how to get Terry on here and talk about mental health.
And I knew I had to do it. I first of all, I was so cool. It was so cool to see you and Nate talking about this stuff. And I couldn't hold back. It was like, go guys, go. Like, yes.
Well, thank you.
You know what I mean? And it's so powerful, because I had to encourage you, because it was like, no man, every time someone's willing to talk about this stuff, it breaks down another brick. Remember, every time you use, you're putting a brick up.
Yep.
But every time we talk, pulling a brick down.
Yep.
You know, and I just decided, pull these bricks down, man. Pull these walls down, and you're gonna get teased. Some people are gonna not understand.
Yeah.
But dude, you know how many people do?
Yep.
Like the people who do are way more than the people who don't.
Right. And you're able to help so many people just by telling your story, because relatability is one of the biggest things with mental health. So one, thank you for coming on. I have a couple more questions for you. I want to get into some fun stuff here too. Mental health's fun, but I want to get into some of your career. I saw you at the Rams game 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Of course, they got you on the big screen singing the famous song from White Chicks. Do you have a favorite moment from your career, a favorite part that you've played? I mean, I think I love Longest Yard. Like, I'm just such a fun character. But between that, White Chicks, America's Got Talent, I mean, you've got to do a lot of cool things, plus your NFL career. I mean,
Yes.
Is there something you can point to that's like, this is my moment?
Actually, it's like trying to pick out a favorite child. Can't do it.
Some parents do it.
And I would never do that. I love all my kids.
There's the answer.
But this is the deal. Like my son got famous. Like he had a TV show.
Yeah.
And I have another daughter who's quietly doing her dream. Is one better than the other? No, not at all. You know what I mean? It's like, as long as they're living their best life, I look at that for every project. Mm-hmm. Like, I got little projects that didn't do anything, but I love to death.
Yeah.
That I'm like, man, I'm so glad I did that. And then I have big, giant things that I'm like, that went pretty good.
Yeah.
And I love them the same. And I have to tell you, it's funny because people do know you more from certain things. Mm-hmm. But I am the accumulation of everything I've been through.
Right.
From every part, everything. I love The Longest Yard. The Longest Yard got me Everybody Hates Chris because I worked with Chris Rock. And then it got me all those movies with Sandler.
Yep.
And then all those movies with the Wayans. And then and it got me Brooklyn Nine-Nine and from Idiocracy and President Camacho and jumping. I mean, everything first of all, every iota of my career, and I made this a rule, is I don't do anything for money. I only do it for the satisfaction of doing it. And the money, I let the money take care of itself.
Yep.
That's the thing. So I love what if I'm doing it, I promise you I love it. Because there's no way. AGT is one of the most satisfying jobs I've ever had because you're giving dreams away. Dude, I would put that on. I can't pick which one is my favorite.
Right.
Because it's all wonderful. It's part of this wonderful.
It's so fun to watch.
Becoming. You see what I mean? Because that's what I'm doing. Terry Crews is never there. It's the journey. You're becoming. Yep. I'm becoming something. I don't know what my next iteration is going to be, but I'm loving every bit of what I'm doing. I'm loving it.
You can tell that too. The big smile helps, but you are genuinely happy with everything that you do. And I'm sure the mental health side of things, being true to yourself, going to therapy, working on yourself makes it even more enjoyable these last 10 to 15 years. Last thing I want to ask you, unless there's something you want to add, I always ask people to give advice for someone that wants to follow in their footsteps. So if there is a young actor, actress, somebody that wants to get here in Hollywood or maybe is in school in New York and has those big dreams of doing movies and TV, what would you tell someone that has those dreams?
One thing I would really love to say is figure out what you want. And this it sounds simple, but it's wild because what you want changes.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You're 5 years in, and some people have become lawyers and be like, I don't want this. You know what I mean?
Right.
And it's like you realize you've been doing stuff for your parents the whole time.
Yeah.
You realize you've been doing something for somebody else. You were trying to do this to get girls. You've been trying to do this, but you never wanted that.
Right.
Dude, you gotta understand, I spent years just writing down what it is I wanted. What do I want? What do I want? And that determines who you become. When you want good things, because there are things I realized that I wanted because I was selfish, because I was narcissistic.
Yeah.
And then I realized I didn't want that anymore. And then when I wanted the right things, it made me a better person.
Yeah.
I want to be the best husband that has ever walked the earth. You know what I mean? I want my wife to look at me. Let me tell you, the number one thing I want, period, is my wife to look at me and be like, I'm so proud of who he is. That's my man. And he he is the best husband I could have ever possibly had. See, that changes all the goals.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And when I tell young actors or anyone's trying to get in this biz, whatever, what do you want? Like, figure it out. Because if you figure that out, everything comes with it. Everything.
Yeah.
And I think that it's wild because if people have the wrong goals and they haven't figured out what they want, someone else is going to put that in you. They'll make one for you.
Right.
If you don't do it yourself, all of a sudden Hollywood tells you what you want.
Well,
and that's crazy.
It is crazy. It's a crazy business. You've had a crazy, successful career, Terry. Thank you so much, brother, for coming on the Mental
Brandon,
Game.
Thank you so much.
It means a lot to me. I know this is going to help a lot of people, and we'll see everybody right back here next week on the Mental Game.
Thank you.
And I can't thank Terry enough for really opening up here on the Mental Game with me about his own mental health, those suicidal thoughts, and tough moments in his life. And for everyone at home watching and listening, Terry Crews is exactly that same charismatic, fun-loving, great person you see in your TV and movies. It is such a cool experience for me to get to sit down with him for an hour and talk mental health. I can't thank Terry enough for coming on the Mental Game. That was no doubt my biggest and favorite interview so far. Next week on the Mental Game, it is another surprise guest, and it's another big one. I'm bringing one of the biggest rappers in hip-hop to the Mental Game. You will see that right back here next week on the Mental Game.